Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being with us today on behalf of the National League of Cities. Today, we are here to talk about our nation's communities and how, with our federal partners, we can lead together in a brighter, safer, and more secure future for America. As COVID-19 cases rise across the country and local officials race to put in place the infrastructure to distribute vaccines to their residents, there has never been a more important moment for Congress to deliver the critical relief to put communities back on track. Today, we want to talk about more than just the needs and ask related questions about how the pandemic is impacting the cities, towns, and villages throughout America. We will also talk about moving America forward and the critical role local government plays and the leaders of local government play. You know, the important part is partnership is what connects the policies we discuss today and the advocacy we do tomorrow. And no one knows better about the partnership between local and federal levels than a former mayor turned member of Congress, a friend of the National League of Cities. But you know, I'm gonna pause a moment and ask Mayor Sue Ing Moody of Twist, Washington, to introduce Congresswoman Marilyn, Mayor Strickland. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Clarence, and good morning from the town of Twisp in north central Washington State. I'm Sue Ing Moody, Twisp Mayor, and this year I also serve as president of the Association of Washington Cities, representing all 281 cities and towns in our state. I'm the mayor of a relatively small town. Our population hovers around 1,000, which is not unrepresentative of Washington State, since the majority of the cities in our cities in our state are small, with populations less than 5,000. Yet regardless of the size of city or town, our challenges and opportunities resemble other cities across the country. Like others, we have been stretched thin and are exhausted with COVID-19 response. The work of cities has been on the front lines of this pandemic, supporting other frontline workers to ensure public health and safety while keeping our communities and economies intact. To do so, we rely on aging infrastructure and faced with insufficient funds and tools to solve the many problems alone. Partnership is what is needed with our federal partners to ensure an expedient recovery. To add to these challenges, Twisp has experienced unprecedented recurring natural disasters in the form of our state's largest and most devastating wildfires, a risk that even during a pandemic remains top of mind in our area. In the course of delivering vital services like many cities across our country, we are taking much needed steps to confront race, equity, and diversity concerns. Washington cities are standing together as we look forward to the opportunity of strengthening our collaboration with our federal partners to ensure a vibrant future for the people we serve. And now, it is truly my honor and privilege to introduce our first guest, Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland of Washington's 10th District. Newly elected and serving her first term in the House, she is a former City Council member and two-term mayor of the city of Tacoma, the third largest city in our state. So it goes without saying that she knows, like Clarence had said, what makes cities strong, is an experienced leader and federal partner who will be a voice of reason and support for all of us on the front lines. So with that, thank you for joining us, Congresswoman Strickland, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for that very generous introduction, and I'm so incredibly proud of you and your leadership with the Association of Washington Cities. And of course, I want to give a very special shout out to my good friend Clarence Anthony, who is the leader of the National League of Cities. He's doing a phenomenal job, and I feel good about where America's cities are with the leadership of NLC and all of you, and with Clarence at the helm. So when I ran for Congress last year, people often ask me, well, what differentiates you as a candidate? And what's going to be different about you when you get to Congress? And I said at the time that Congress needs the lens of local elected officials. Congress needs the lens of mayors. And as we're looking at this pandemic and all of the challenges that we're facing in every city or town, regardless of the size, we know that local government knows more about its community than anyone else. So as I think about the role of Congress during this pandemic, during what I'm calling the rescue phase, and then the recovery phase, We know that your voice is so incredibly important. You're the ones who know your neighborhoods. You're the ones who know your departments of health. You're the ones who know where the schools are and where we can do mass vaccinations. So as a body of legislators here in Washington, D.C., we always have to remember that we are representing the people at home who sent us here. Now, I am very honored to serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee because we know that the Biden administration wants to make a massive investment in infrastructure. And historically, this has been only about roads and bridges. But what I especially like right now is that we're taking a more comprehensive view of what infrastructure means. It means that we include low-income and affordable housing as basic infrastructure. It means that we know we need to invest more in public transportation because that's infrastructure. We know that access to broadband, especially in rural underserved communities, is incredibly important. So by taking a very comprehensive approach to infrastructure, we can help people meet their basic needs. We can put people back to work in good jobs, and we can address climate change by investing in crucial infrastructure. I'm also part of the Armed Services Committee, and for me that's very personal and necessary because of Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is in the middle of my district, and it's the largest military installation on the West Coast and contributes $8 billion a year in revenue and impact to our state and region. So that's incredibly important. But coming back to what the Biden administration is proposing and what we want to pass in Congress, I know that when I was on the campaign trail, I heard about the first CARES recovery package, and the threshold for communities to get money was population of 500,000 or more. When I heard that, my initial reaction was, well, that does something for one city in my state. As we look at the next set of recoveries, I am thrilled to tell you that local communities will have a role in this. And I'm going to read a list of what we plan to do. We plan to put $20 million into public transportation, $50 billion for local jurisdictions to implement better testing and more for cities to support emergency response, and then $350 billion of direct assistance for state and cities as a lifeline. We know this pandemic has had profound economic impact, and the reality is we're not going to have a full, sustainable, or equitable economic recovery until we address this pandemic. And we know that we're also in the midst of a housing crisis, and that existed before the pandemic came along. We know that access to healthcare and inequities have existed for a long time. But this pandemic and this administration, those with the leadership of Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, have committed to equity and inclusion as the lens for which they will do things. They are unapologetic about talking about racial equity. And I say that because historically that conversation has been viewed by some as a zero-sum game. If we're addressing racial equity, then we're taking something away from someone else. That is patently false. By addressing racial equity, that is good policy for all people in every community. And as a member of Congress, I am dedicated to that. And I think about, the idea of Build Back Better. That's not just a slogan. It is a call to action. And in order for this call to action to be effective, we need you in local government to step up and to be unapologetic and unafraid about telling us what you need. I know that every March and in December, NLC gets together and there's policy making, and there's the visit up to the Hill. And of course now with COVID, that's not going to happen the way it normally would. But I will say this, make sure when you come to Congress that you know exactly what it is you want. Asking for everything means that something isn't likely going to happen. So focus on 3 things that you know your community needs badly. When I started forming my office, the first thing I started doing was meeting with mayors in my district. And I'll tell you why that's important, because now I know that there is an access road project that Tumwater, Washington wants for a brewery district that they're building. I now know that Joint Base Lewis McChord still has issues around traffic and needs more public transportation. I know that the city of Lacey is building a veteran center and they want to be a center of excellence. And all those things are incredibly important, but you have to tell your elected officials what it is you want. And it doesn't matter what size your city is. You have a right to have your member of Congress represent for you. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say too is encourage members of Congress to bring back earmarks. I know that there was a period when earmarks had a bad reputation, but the Appropriations Committee has committed itself to being transparent, to being open, and to being fair about how that money gets distributed. If we have earmarks come back, it means that members of Congress have another tool to deliver funds and resources back to our local communities. And then finally, if there's one thing I can say, regardless of where you are in this nation, we need people to get vaccinated. And at the federal level, we have the responsibility to put as many resources into getting as much vaccine out to local communities. But as local leaders, you have an opportunity to get the vaccine and to publicize it, to wear your mask when you're around other people, and to tell people to mask up and to socially distance. If we can do those three things and do them well, we can get over this pandemic and focus on an economic recovery. We can focus on small business, we can get our students and teachers back in school, and we can start to think about this recovery that will make us come back stronger, better, and more equitable. So thank you for your time. I look forward to meeting you all in person sometime soon once we beat this pandemic. And again, it's an honor to be here. America's cities and towns make our country work. And as a member of Congress, my job is to help make you more effective. Thank you.
Congresswoman Mayor Strickland, thank you so much for those kind words and motivating words to our municipal officials all over America. We really need you in Congress, and I hope that you will call on NLC when you need us, because we want to be there for you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone.
You know, as Congresswoman Strickland said, the local voice is important. With the new administration and Congress, the conversation around the need for emergency relief to municipalities is still relevant. You know, local leaders have been on the front lines responding to the pandemic for nearly a year now, and we can't believe how time has flown as we dealt with this issue and this challenge in our nation. But I will tell you, there's no question that the local leadership has made a difference, and we will continue to make that difference. To the congressional staff in this virtual room, NLC members will be back in March for our virtual Congressional City Conference. So be on the lookout for meeting requests for our virtual Hill Day on March the 10th, because NLC represents 19,000 cities, towns, and villages. And we want to be partners with you. We want to be a resource with you as we communicate and we advocate on behalf of cities, towns, and villages of all sizes. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over. I think I am to introduce Chrissy McFarland. And Chrissy, I'm going to let you, well, actually, yes, I'm supposed to introduce Christy. Dr. McFarland, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Clarence. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. You know, as we started to hear, despite the optimism on the horizon as vaccines roll out, we know that cities, towns, and villages across America face significant and prolonged budget shortfalls, which without aid will continue to be a drag on national economic recovery. Today, I'll discuss the overall fiscal condition of cities, the consequences of these budget challenges, as well as the significant return on investment to the economy that would result from federal aid to cities. The National League of Cities estimates that cities, towns, and villages face a staggering $90 billion shortfall in revenue from the COVID-19 pandemic from FY20 to 21. This loss represents a steeper revenue decline than any recession in recent history. Importantly, the sudden and steep decline in revenues this year does not imply a sudden and steep rise in revenues when the economy and the public health crisis turn around. Based on what we know from the Great Recession, it takes years for cities to recover lost revenue. Indeed, we can start to map out the prolonged fiscal impacts on cities. To gauge how the local economy is impacting the ability of cities to provide critical services to their communities, we surveyed finance officers about their ability and about the ability of their budgets to meet the financial needs of their cities. In this chart, the green portion indicates the share of finance officers reporting that their city is better able this year over last to meet the financial needs of their community. The purple portion is the shares indicating less able. When asked about their fiscal capacity for 2020, nearly 8 in 10 finance officers indicate that their cities were less able to meet fiscal needs than the prior year. When asked about 2021, the fiscal year most cities are in right now, this jumps to nearly 90% of cities being less able to provide basic services. This is the least optimistic finance officers have been since the low point of the Great Recession. So let's unpack this a little bit. What is happening here? We know that in addition to expenditures outpacing revenues, leaving significant budget gaps that cities are required to close, we know that the various types of revenues that cities collect respond differently to what's happening in the economy. Although losses are evident across the board, the impact of COVID-19 on FY 2020 budgets demonstrates the immediate responsiveness of revenue sources like sales and income taxes, which are the purple and green lines on this chart. And this chart measures year-over-year growth in these different sources. We saw those drop precipitously in 2020. Although property tax revenues, the largest source of revenues for most cities, took less of a hit in FY 2020, they won't be so lucky in FY 21. You can see an emerging trend in the blue line. Many cities are now starting to feel the blow to their budgets as property tax revenues finally catch up with economic realities. This is because property tax revenues take longer to respond due to property assessments and collection practices at the local level. And cities have reason to worry. In addition to residents struggling to pay property taxes, projections suggest that property values for apartments, offices, and retail real estate won't find their bottom until the middle of next year. Worse, the rebound to pre-COVID levels could take until 2022 and beyond. We're seeing this already. Places like Santa Fe, New Mexico, projecting $100 million budget shortfall for FY 21 after experiencing $46 million shortfall in FY 20. From Portland, Maine to Yuma, Arizona, many cities are feeling the hit more significantly in 2021 than in 2020, often due to property tax revenue collections. And we know that we're going to see this as an impact going forward. The bottom line is that the worst is yet to come for many cities. And of course, we're already starting to see the economic consequences of local budget challenges. You'll hear from our mayors today in more detail. But we know that with significant restrictions on raising new revenues and balanced budget requirements, municipalities are turning to their options of last resort, which are to severely cut services at a time when communities need them most, to lay off and furlough employees who comprise a large share of America's middle class, and to pull back on capital projects, all of which widen racial disparities and further impact local employment, health, financial well-being, business activity, and overall investment in the economy. In addition to cuts, cities are depleting reserves, which they steadily built up in a very responsible way, up to their highest levels in 2019 following the Great Recession. These cuts and tapping reserves we know are band-aids that have helped municipalities limp through 2020. But these will not be sufficient going forward. The experiences and tough decisions that cities have had to make are difficult ones, but deciding what to do next should not be. Based on analysis from BEA and Moody's Analytics, we know that for every $1 that the federal government provides to state and local governments, GDP increases about $1.40. The point is that aid to cities provides one of the largest bangs for the buck when the federal government is considering stimulus policy options. As a sector, local governments play a strong role in supporting overall economic activity and recovery, from employment and purchases to infrastructure and contracting. Federal government's role has historically been to provide this countercyclical support to cities during a recession, because it has long recognized that cities are not intended to absorb the brunt of economic shocks, but instead to be our nation's safety net. And they need the support now more than ever. Our data and analysis indicate that the state of America's cities, towns, and villages depends on direct federal funding as a proven mechanism to getting the economy back on track. Thank you. Clarence, I think you're still muted.
That is one of my 2021 goals, not to hear that you are muted one day of the year, just one day. Dr. McFarland, what a great overview and what a wonderful setup for this outstanding panel that we have today. I'm honored to turn it over to Irma Esparza-Diggs, the National League of Cities Senior Executive and Director of Federal Advocacy, who will moderate our panel discussion with Mayor Luke Bonin of Hartford, Connecticut, Mayor Quentin Hart of Waterloo, Iowa, and Mayor Karen Hunt of Coppell, Texas. And of course, our first Vice President, Mayor Vince Williams of Union City, Georgia. And it is my pleasure to turn it over to you, Irma.
Thank you, Clarence. First of all, thank you all mayors for being with us today. We're excited to get into this panel, especially with the context that Congresswoman Strickland provided, as well as Dr. McFarland in terms of the research and just making a strong case for why we need emergency relief today. So want to get into the first question and start with you, Mayor Williams. You know, the topic of the day is definitely COVID, and you all have really been on the front line since day one in dealing with this pandemic, from protecting your public health and safety of your residents to keeping essential services running, now with vaccine distribution and ongoing testing, and keeping your essential personnel on the job. As we look toward economic recovery, tell us about your economic impact on your community, both what it has been in the short term and long term. What do you see, Mayor Williams, as that impact that this pandemic has caused?
Well, certainly thank you, Irma, and certainly all of my colleagues that are on the panel. Thank you for being with us. This is an important conversation we're having today, and how appropriate to have a congressional member who gets it. Someone who comes from the local lens, she understands what we're going through each and every day. When you speak about this beast of COVID-19 that has certainly ravaged all of our communities, but we are hit hard here in Georgia, and certainly because that we have had lackluster support from the federal level to be able to take care of our communities. You know, certainly it has been very disappointing, and it is time for the federal government to assist us to making sure that we get men, women, and children not only tested and vaccinated, but certainly back in their homes, back to school. Those are the things that really are hurting our communities. Right now, as it relates to our revenue streams, we heard from Christy with all of the great data, but certainly in listening to Congresswoman Strickland, you know, it is vitally important that the federal government, the men and women that we sent to Washington to bid and do the right thing for all of us, it is time to do what is necessary, and that is to get funding to our communities, because what we do know is, you know, cities, towns, and villages all over this country are hurting. You know, if we continue to take the posture of debating one another in Congress as to what we're going to do, how we're going to help cities, how we're going to do help communities, you know, people are dying. You know, Irma, I was with a group of individuals about 3 days ago. They lost their mother, their father, and their grandmother. This is a family of 6 people. They lost the 3 sources of income, with children still back. They're grieving the loss of their parents, the loss of their grandmother. Their father had already lost his job due to COVID because he wasn't considered an essential worker. So they were struggling then. You know, so I am just thankful that we're having this conversation, but I also want to reach out to those members of Congress that are listening right now. We need you to do the right thing. You know, we have 2 amazing individuals who Georgia made sure they sent to Washington. And I am praying that they don't do like a lot of members do. That is, they forget where they came from. And it is time to do what needs to be done. And Irma, I know you asked me a whole lot, but I tell you, I'm thinking about this family.
Yep.
And it's heartbreaking because there are men and women in Washington right now. They're saying what they're going to do, what they need to do. Well, maybe we need to pare this down. Maybe we should do this or do that. There are people dying, folks, and they need you.
Yep. And they're
Thanks,
coming. No problem. And I understand and can appreciate the passion and the empathy, because those families are looking to you all as local leaders for support, where to turn, and frankly, how to rebuild, especially after losing their the primary wage earners for that household. So thank you, Mayor Williams. Just one quick follow-up question though for you, Mayor Williams. Can you share whether or not Union City received direct funding from the state, and if from Department of Treasury, and if not, when you did receive those funds?
Irma, I was hoping I wouldn't get that question because we didn't get a dime from the state. We didn't get one dime from the state. Certainly the state, made a concession that, hey, we're going to share with all of our cities who didn't get funding, because as you know, 36 cities around this country got funded because they met the requirement of being a population of over 500,000. That is less than 0.03% of the cities, towns, and villages in this nation. That is ridiculous. But no, we didn't get any assistance from the state. We had to battle the county to get funding from them, because the county got funding based off of the populations that make up the county from the cities. So we had to almost threaten a lawsuit before we got anything. It wasn't enough to do anything with. We did like most grandmothers do. They would take a bag of beans and a chicken and make a meal for a whole week. That's what we did. I haven't been able to assist not one of my residents with rental assistance, mortgage assistance. I got small businesses that have died because members of Congress haven't done the right thing. They get a chance to go home, relax, and think about what game they're going to play with the next member the next day. This has got to stop. Thank you.
We hear you. Thank you, Mayor Williams. Mayor Hunt, that's a tough act to follow, but I know you have your own story to tell in terms of Coppell, Texas. Can you please provide us some insight on for you and your city, what critical services have you been concerned about? Capital projects have been paused. How has your your ability to meet the needs of your residents been impacted?
I'm going to talk about Coppell, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about North Texas and Texas as a whole. Coppell is in a Dallas County, which kind of tells you what our biggest city is Dallas. And so when the federal funds went to the large cities and then the remainder went to the state of Texas carved it out and sent it out to the counties. And we had to fight a little bit as well, because our county thought that they knew best, did not talk to the individual. Well, they talked to us, but didn't really believe that we knew better than they did. And so they kept the majority of the money, but they did give us some to cover expenses for testing, PPE equipment, those types of things, as well as allowed us to grant money out to businesses that literally were dying on the vine. As across the United States and across Texas, restaurants were the primary hit, if you will, and we were trying to help businesses with their signage and all of those types of things, the things that they needed to add takeout to their menu. And it was that direct money wasn't enough, but it evidently kept some of them alive, and some of them have closed their doors for good. So the way that it was sent out, with the county deciding what the whole city needed, or the whole county needed, and then giving each city a little bit other than the city of Dallas, it took a long time, and we believe, the city council and I believe, that it wasn't done in the most effective manner. But that being said, now we're going into vaccines, and we are in the exact same spot. We have to rely on the county, and some counties throughout Texas are doing it very well. We are telling them, to the people of Dallas, to contact Chick-fil-A and figure out how to do lines, because they know how to do lines. It just hasn't happened here in a good way. But again, there are other counties that are doing a great job. We have already vaccinated, I think, over 2 million Texans. But as the vaccines become more and more available, we are hoping that our citizens don't have to drive halfway across the county to get even in a line to get vaccines. So the smaller cities just don't get input. And in this world, it's very critical.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, for that point. Mayor Bronin and Hart, especially the smaller cities, really resonated with me. Any additional thoughts on that question that you wanted to share? And I believe you're on mute, Mayor Bronin. There you go.
Thanks, Irma, and thanks, Clarence, for your leadership, and great to be here with my fellow mayors and everybody who's watching. Thanks for taking the time. I just add a couple of things. I saw some statements today from Republican senators who were questioning why state and local aid was an important part of a relief package, and looking at tax receipts and saying, well, a lot of places have seen tax receipts hold steady. I think it's really, really important to stress a couple of things. One, communities are going to be hit in different ways by this pandemic, and the fiscal impact is going to take a different form in different places. But I'll give you an example from Hartford. You know, we are a city that we are one of the poorer communities in the country, but a big part of our tax base is the large commercial office buildings that sit at the center of our city, in our commercial business district. Those buildings have been empty since March. And we know that a lot of the tenants in those buildings probably aren't going to come back at 100% of their footprint. They may not even come back at 80% of their footprint. There's enormous uncertainty. That's going to have a really big effect on our tax base, but it may be delayed. We're not yet feeling it in this fiscal year, but we may feel it more in the next fiscal year or the one after that. And so I think it's really important to recognize that communities are going to be hit in different ways. And one of the things that's so critical is not only that there be an adequate amount of federal funding dedicated to municipal governments, but that it be flexible enough to meet the needs of each community. That means it can't be too tightly constrained in what time frame it needs to be used. It can't be limited to direct COVID expenditures as some of the first rounds of assistance were, because again, communities are going to have a whole bunch of needs. Many of them are not fully known right now. And that's just on the revenue side. I mean, you get to the expenditure side, it's a whole different question when you talk about the investments that cities are going to need to help their communities recover. It's not just about helping city government recover, it's about helping people recover, small businesses recover, kids re-engage and reconnect to the classroom. That's going to take a massive effort, and it's going to take a massive investment to do it right.
Yeah, Mayor Bronin, you are so right in terms of the impact of this pandemic on municipal budgets, the need for flexibility, not just in terms of how we utilize those funds, but the time period in which we have to expend these funds. Because frankly, those cities, they are on different fiscal years, first of all, their budgets, right? And also the pandemic has hit their budgets differently depending on what the primary source of revenue is. So for those communities that are more reliant on property taxes, that is very much a delayed impact on that local economy. And frankly, because of the impact, you know, you look at the market and the strength of the market, it doesn't speak to how cities are faring, because frankly, cities are more dependent upon middle-class wage earners and sources of revenues. And so because of that, all of that has that fiscal impact is that delayed is really crucial to us getting a package that not only is direct, but is flexible enough for us to spend it in a way that really speaks to what your needs are. Mayor Hart, any additional points you would like to make?
Just really quickly, you know, I thank all the mayors. Thank you, Executive Director Clarence and everyone for this forum today. But I bet you there will be a different conversation of some of the comments that were given by some of our Republican leaders actually came to a place like Waterloo, Iowa, and talked to the citizens that are here every day, the citizens that I talk to. And it's also with me, it's heavy heart today because one of my childhood fathers passed away last night from complications from COVID. And we all share those personal stories and testimonies. And not in a million years, I think December 5th, in 2019, we'd be hosting this incredible event for local candidates, national news, 4 months later be on national television because the same, my city was probably, my county was #1 hotspot from COVID. So places like Black Hawk County, places like all the other mayors have mentioned need that direct federal support. And it's important and imperative that we receive that from our losses of revenue streams such as road taxes, sales taxes, hotel, motel taxes, from our venues that help produce quality of life overall for our citizens. There's been an incredible hit taken to those areas. So Iowa does not have a city that has over 500,000 people in it at all. So when you're talking about that direct funding, we kind of miss the boat in that area. And I'm not saying that that's not important, they didn't receive it, but we need to make sure that Midwestern cities or cities throughout this country do not miss an opportunity to tap into that direct funding that's needed to help us move forward.
Most definitely. So Mayor Hart, while I have you, let me ask you, you know, you talked about your city and how diverse it is, and you are very much the chief problem solver for all of the residents that live within your city, particularly when it comes to America's infrastructure, you know, your workforce development needs, housing and public safety. Can you share with us one of the most critical challenges you face as a city leader and talk about maybe bring forward an innovative solution that your city or your region is putting forward?
Well, any conversation that we have about rebuilding our communities, you know, we've seen some success there. You know, it was mentioned the property tax collections, but that doesn't tell the underlying story that we're facing. But when it's time to rebuild our cities, we need to make sure that we are building resilient infrastructures within our communities. One example, and it's really off example, but skate park kept being flooded in this location, floodway and all of that. The only way that we were able to receive monies from the federal government was if we built it exactly the same way we did before. In another area, we have, we went through 2 500-year floods within 8 years. and we're asking to rebuild the same way. So we have all of these initial mandates and things that are taking place within our local community, but we're not moving forward with a federal agenda that builds back these things better in a common sense way. COVID has exposed our overall broadband divide, digital divide within our communities. There are young people that do not have access the way they need to. So when we're taking a look at an overall package for infrastructure, we need to make sure that that digital divide and those other problems don't continue to widen, but we're able to bring things together in a manner that has a positive impact on all parts of our community. So we need to build back better and build back smarter.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the response. So let me ask you, Mayor Hunt, I'm a native Texan, you know, and especially you being there in North Texas, transportation is key to getting around. So let me ask you, as Congress considers an infrastructure package and the reauthorization of transportation, and both of those are on their to-do list this year, as well as President Biden's, what are the most pressing transportation issues in your city, in your region? And what are the federal programs that most meet those needs?
One of the things that we have here locally is we have I have a road that goes through right down the middle of the city of Coppell, and it is a major artery. And it is in different places, it's approximately 30 to 35 years old. And originally it was intended to only be last about 25 years. And my city is no different than the rest of the ones across the state. And you know whose issue and responsibility it is to fix that major artery? It is the city of Coppell, or the city of Round Rock, or the city of whatever across the state. There are very few dollars that are available for those types of things. We can go to our regional partners and see if they could help us with some of the federal grants that they get, but typically that is on us. And as an example, in 2007, it cost $413 a linear foot for those types of roads. In 2019, it was $781 a linear foot. And I can tell you that in 2021, it's probably a good 30% higher than that. There aren't as many options for cities, especially smaller cities, to have access to those federal funds. And it would be another coup if that could happen. We are excited about all the different options that transportation infrastructure. We have talked a little bit about broadband, but broadband is probably the state of Texas. As a matter of fact, the governor put it on his emergency list for this next session, is to figure out broadband for not only our rurals, because it's telemedicine, it's schools, it's all kinds of things. It's doing business today, and people don't have reliable access or any access. So when we talk about infrastructure, we want to make sure that the cities have a voice in what's important as well. And it doesn't always happen that way.
It sure doesn't, especially for our small and mid-sized cities. So let me ask you, Mayor Bronin, when it comes to federal programs for infrastructure, housing, and transportation, how can the federal government best support you and our other small and mid-sized cities? What are some unique challenges that you face compared to larger cities?
Sure, thanks, Irma. You know, there's a lot that I could say in response to that. I'm going to take advantage of that question to talk about something that's been a priority of mine. I think matters to a lot of mid-sized cities here in this region, in the North Atlantic or New England, which is public transportation and rail connectivity in particular. But just stepping back from that for a second, we have seen in this country a tremendous divergence over the last couple of decades. You have cities that caught the tech wave, saw enormous growth, saw housing costs go through the roof, saw people priced out, and you saw communities on the other hand that were left behind. And I hope that building back better includes trying to lift those communities up. And to me, one of the best ways to do that is smart infrastructure investment. When you look at what drove economic growth in this country in the 19th century or the 20th century, it was big, bold infrastructure. It was the Transcontinental Railroad and the network that came off of that. It was the interstate highway system. Here in this North Atlantic region, we're pushing for a high-speed, high-frequency rail service to connect New England cities because, we've got, at least pre-pandemic, we had two of the biggest, fastest-growing metro economies in the world nearby in New York and Boston. But a lot of folks who couldn't afford to live there and a lot of mid-sized cities close to those big centers, but disconnected because of ailing infrastructure. And so using a commitment to infrastructure as an opportunity to create economic growth for communities that have not seen enough opportunity, I think is one of the biggest things that we can do right now to lift up tens of millions of Americans and hundreds or thousands of communities around the country. At the same time, obviously, there's a ton of smaller infrastructure projects that need to get done, things that are delayed and deferred, everything from roads to levees. And we've seen the tragedies that can occur when you don't invest in that kind of infrastructure. So I hope on infrastructure, we will take a page out of the prior centuries' books in America and be willing to go big and go bold in the 21st century.
Thank you. And so we've talked about the need for stimulus relief, investing in our nation's infrastructure, and broadband and meeting the public health and safety needs of your community. Let me ask you, starting with you, Mayor Hart, and then we'll go to Mayor Williams. What keeps you up at night? When it comes to the federal government, what is keeping you up at night? And frankly, how are you looking for the federal government to help you meet that need?
Well, in addition to everything that was mentioned by all of the mayors, I'm in complete agreement. But I'm thinking that the mentality that there is no Democratic COVID, there's no Republican COVID at this point. This age that we're in, where mayors and governors and federal officials are at odds, but COVID is the enemy right now. And if any time in our nation's history, when we need to stand together, work together, and fight together, it's right now. So, we just need to make sure that is the focus, and also making sure that we don't create policies that had the impact of creating disparities in the first place. So we have to look at all our communities, and that we need to make sure that we stay together, we partner together, and as Mayor Bronin said, go big and go better.
Got it. Mayor Williams, what keeps you up at night as it relates to the federal government?
Well, certainly one of the things that certainly keeps me up at night is wondering, will they do the right thing? And I hate to keep, driving this, and certainly my good friend Mayor Hart just stated, this is not a red or a blue issue. This is a people issue. This is not just a big city issue. This is an every city issue. We have got to make sure that we are serving each and every community. Just a few weeks ago, all eyes were on Georgia. All eyes were on Georgia, because if we get it the way we're going to do this, it's time to do what you said you're going to do. And it doesn't mean that we have to be a divided nation. This is not a one-up on anybody, because this is a people issue. It is time for us to focus on, how do we best serve our communities in the midst of COVID-19. But also, it is time for us to continue thinking about infrastructure and all of those things that we must do to keep our nation #1. We are failing everyday men and women by not doing what we should do when we were elected to serve on their behalf. We're not doing that. And certainly I hope that those men and women who are listening, but also those men and women who will take this back to some of their colleagues, that they understand there are people depending on them to make sure that they can enjoy a decent quality of life.
We hear you. We hear you. Agreed. Mayor Hunt, what keeps you up at night in terms of the federal government? What can they do?
Yeah, I agree with Mayor Hart and Mayor Williams that the whole idea of COVID and our inability to deal with it quickly. I understand government is slow, but and this reaction has been fairly quick in government terms, but it needs to move faster. And it is the thing that keeps me up at night is we spend so much time on COVID that we're losing sight of what we're supposed to do as elected officials. We're supposed to be looking at 6 months, a year, 2 years, 4 years, 8 years into the future and setting ourselves up. And the instability that the COVID pandemic has given us makes looking forward very unstable. And so until we can really get those vaccinations out and get them out quickly and effectively, it's going to be hard for local officials to be able to feel that we have stable income to rely on, to plan with, and those types of things. So I just agree.
I hear you.
Irma, may I say this? You know, one of the things we all need to consider, and I'm talking to all of the listeners and all of us here, between 93 and 96% of our cities, towns, and villages are staying up, and the mayors are staying up at night, because what we're looking at are the potential for layoffs, job cuts from our police and fire departments. How devastating would that be to each and every community? Those are the things that we see and we're in touch with each and every day as local leaders. You know, and our friends at the federal government, you don't see the faces we see every day. Every day. We see this every day. So we're hoping that you're there, rolling your sleeves up, ready to do what's right.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Williams. And that's a great segue to the first question in our chat box. And so the question is, you know, the president has proposed $350 billion in his rescue package. Is that enough in direct assistance from federal government? And what is our ask as a national organization? I can just start by saying, you know, as the mayors mentioned before, it is what we are fighting for at this point. When you break up that amount between state, tribes, and territorial governments, we estimate that it'll probably be about $69 billion that comes to just municipalities, another $69 billion roughly to county governments. Just for this year alone, we at NLC in our last survey estimated, and this is talking to cities directly, a $90 billion shortfall for 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across this country. And so because of that shortfall, that $350 billion for state and local governments in total is a start. But frankly, as the mayor said, we are going to need enough funding to get us through this recession and help address our bottom lines, not just this year, but for next year and for 2022. Any additional points to that response, mayors?
Well, I do want, with what you just shared, we need our leaders to understand this is not about backfilling, you know, local economies and local city budgets, because we must, by law, turn in a balanced budget every year, no matter what. And we do it. We don't have the luxury to shut down freaking government. We got to do what we need to do to make it happen. You know, so it's time for all of us to come together and figure out how we're gonna bounce back. How are we gonna make sure that we open up our nation? Because we are in a critical juncture right now where people are depending on whatever. And I tell you, you know, in my city, I am a population under 30,000. And I think about, you know, even during COVID, we had this massive census that almost turned out to be a debacle because of COVID. But we're depending on those numbers to assist us in getting more federal support from the federal government. But again, this is not about backfilling our local budgets. We know how to do what we do, but we need to do this together. We need your help. HELP, SOS. Right now, today, we need your help.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. And Clarence, on that note, Pastor Williams, we should all just say amen, and I will turn it back over to you for closing remarks. Thank you, mayors, for being with us today, and thank you for sharing your stories and what you're dealing with on the ground. And we know you will be with us tomorrow as we meet with Hill offices as part of our State League fly-in. So we'll see you tomorrow, and I turn it back to you, Clarence.
Wow, you guys have inspired me today with your stories and putting the face of the challenges that you're facing because of the pandemic and the impact that it's having, not just on your budget, on your employees, but also on the people that live in your cities. You know, I often think about the fact that sometimes we're out there and listening to Mayor Williams, we're out there fighting so hard and we don't think about ourselves as well. So I want to encourage you to also put your mask on and take a breath because that's one thing about local leadership. It is hard. It is hard. And the fact that, you know, we need to share with Congress, and that is important. The fact that we need to make sure that we stand strong on behalf of our residents is important as well, because you are going to have a real impact. And so it's often said that, you know, the federal government is there to fund, and we're there to actually deliver and manage. And that's what your citizens expect. And I'm just inspired by all of the mayors that's here and what you're doing. So thank you. You know, there's no one size that fit all response. Every community is different. And you as local leaders know what's important in your community. And we have to tell the stories over and over again, because I think people may forget that cities are made and towns and villages are made up of residents who have issues, and they look to us to solve those. I want to say to the congressional staff again that's in the virtual room, you know, we're going to be here this week with our state municipal leagues. We're going to be here again March the 10th, our virtual day, our virtual Hill Day. And I want to also offer this. We are here to be a partner. We're here to provide analysis, legislative analysis, survey results, reports, and any key information that you need to assist your member with making the right decision or having the right information to make a decision. Cities of all sizes want to be at the table, and some of them have representatives that are there for them. We want to be there with them as well. You know, we're in extraordinary times, and thus we will need extraordinary leadership to address the needs of local governments and our nation. And I want to say that our mayors, council members, and leaders all over America, they're ready to partner with you. We don't have time for the politics at the local level. What we have time for is helping America move forward. So thank you all very much for joining us. Call the National League of Cities, call any of these mayors if you want more stories, because this was one of the most important briefs that I've had in the last couple of months, because it's talking about the role of local government and helping America to move forward. Thank you all so much. Thank the panelists, the NLC team, and Congresswoman Strickland, Mayor. And I know that Mayor Victoria Woodard is on this call, just also clapping for her congressional member. So thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.